All right, my fellow caffeinated chaos crew, buckle up because today's guest is a total powerhouse in the ADHD world. You may know her as the host of Grandma Has ADHD, which, first of all, best podcast name ever, but that's just one of the many hats that she wears. Jami Goldfarb Shapiro is an ADHD advocate, speaker, and all-around disruptor of outdated narratives about neurodivergent. She's out here proving that ADHD doesn't just go away when you hit adulthood. Shocker, I know. And she's leading the charge in creating visibility for ADHDers at every stage of life. We're talking about someone who's not just hosting convos, but shaping them. She's been featured on major platforms, spoken at incredible events, and built a community that makes ADHDers of all ages feel seen. Today, she's here to drop some wisdom, bust some myths, and probably make us feel way less alone in this ADHD parenting journey. So grab your favorite cup of sanity and let's dive in. So, Jami Shapiro, welcome to Chaos and Caffeine.
I love it. Thank you for having me. I've already got my caffeine in hand.
I'm already caffeinated. So before we get into the meat of the interview, I wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself to the audience, how you would like to be introduced.
Well, thank you. First of all, I love your Southern accent. I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. My mom and her whole family have strong Southern accents. My father's family is from New York, and so it's very charming. So I'm in San Diego now. And about a little over 10 years ago, I started a company called Silver Linings Transitions. And a lot of people have not heard of the senior move management industry. Have you?
I have not.
Okay. So what we do, I'm part of an international organization called NASM, NASMM I think it's .org, National Association of Senior Move Managers. We added the word specialty, but I started that business and started working with seniors who were downsizing from their homes and moving into smaller, easier to maintain spaces, senior living, going to be near family, but they had accumulated a lifetime of possessions. And then they needed help, both the physical and the mental components of moving. And then we started organizing because we weren't always doing moves and we needed to be able to help people get organized. So the funny thing is, I've never in my life been organized. And I struggled personally. And I remember when my kids were young, before I knew that I had ADHD, I remember going to my now ex-husband and saying, I can't seem to get it together. Can you help me? I just can't seem to get it together. Again, I did not know that I had ADHD. And at one point he did say, you have ADHD. And I said, no, I don't, because I have a half brother who had to be on Ritalin and was bouncing off of the walls. And I'm like, that's ADHD. I don't have that. And so, I started the business. And then shortly after starting the business, I ended up going through a divorce, and my oldest child ended up having to see a psychiatrist and receive the ADHD diagnosis. And just like a lot of parents, I'm answering the questions for my child, and I'm like, I'm answering more yeses for me. Does that mean I have it? And the psychiatrist looks at me and goes, yeah, absolutely. I've since tested, and by the way, I'm unofficially diagnosed, but as I say in my own podcast, if it quacks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it might be a duck. And so then I realized that I had ADHD and still running a business and now raising 3 children. And by one of them, my oldest, at one point did get homeschooled and we didn't know at the time. So my child is non-binary, so that's why I'm going to use the correct language. So was a girl when diagnosed, and now uses they them pronouns. And I just witnessed my ADHD moment where I went off. Okay. So I'm combined type, by the way, which means I have the inattentive and the hyperactive, and I can talk about what that looks like. Anyway, so I didn't learn a lot about ADHD because I was managing a home with 3 children. My oldest, as I said, really struggled in school, had social anxiety, was super, super bright, and used to read from a very early age, and then all of a sudden could no longer focus on a book. And that was where the ADHD diagnosis came from. So fast forward, I'm just momming and running a business, and I didn't learn anything about ADHD. And then when I was really looking into being a better organizer, having my company be better at the organizing component, I learned about the ICD, which is the Institute for Challenging Disorganization. So that's another one.
Mm.
And that's actually for people who tend to have more disorganization. It can be because they have hoarding disorder. It can be because they are aging and they're just challenges that go with that. It can be ADHD. In fact, I'm a level 2 ADHD specialist. And then I was listening to a podcast, and you know that light bulb moment that happens in your life?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm listening to a podcast, and I'm like, this is my mom. So my mom had fibromyalgia, and my mom had had migraine headaches, and all of a sudden I realized that my mom was now 77 years old and had ADHD. And I used to, when I would do my presentations, I would tell people I come from a family with hoarding disorder, because if you had seen my mom's home, she had stuff everywhere. She had stuff piled all over her furniture. And I called her up and I said, Mom, I have some good news for you. I don't think you have hoarding disorder. I think you have ADHD. And
Mm.
going long story short, I actually created Grandma Has ADHD, which is how I got to you. And it is a podcast for people who are seniors with ADHD, people who love seniors with ADHD, and people who will be seniors with ADHD. So,
Hmm.
that was the answer.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I
Uh-huh.
want to add a couple of tidbits if I could.
Sure.
One, as I shared with you off camera, my son was diagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, myself, his dad, my mom, and my dad have all realized that we have ADHD, some diagnosed, some not.
Mm-hmm.
So I can relate to that.
Mm-hmm.
But there was another tidbit in there where you mentioned, you went undiagnosed for so long
Mm-hmm.
because, the symptoms do not show up the same
Mm-hmm.
in girls.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole nother I
Mm-hmm.
could go down the rabbit hole on that,
I
but I
know.
just want to take the time to acknowledge that,
And
several of us are there. I'm 40 and probably just realized that I had ADHD maybe 5 years ago.
right. So I was 45 when I realized I had it. But here's, speaking of girls, so I knew that my oldest had it. I knew that I had it. I was becoming an ADHD coach, and I didn't see it in my youngest child. And she was recently
Mm.
diagnosed. And then I listened to another podcast where she talked about the 8 girls with ADHD. And, that it's going to be a lot bigger than people realize.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, a couple of things personally. I love that you use the correct pronouns for your children, but I'm also going to try to not fangirl on you because while I was researching for the interview, I found out that you are spiritually awakened, and
Mm-hmm.
I do not meet many people on the path. So, I'm
Mm.
going to try to weave that in.
Okay,
But yes,
please.
I was very excited about
Okay. And all of
that.
this, in fact, I feel very divinely inspired to get the word out about seniors with ADHD. It's like I'm supposed to be here to do this.
Yes. Oh, I
Mhm.
love that.
Yeah. And actually, while we're totally doing that, my company Silver Linings Transitions, the origin of the name was that 20 years ago, picture this, I was 34 with a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I found a lump in my neck and had to go down the path of cancer, waiting
Mhm.
for pathology. It did turn out to be cancer, but fortunately, it turned out to be the good cancer. It was thyroid cancer. But when
Mm.
you go through something like that, they say you either turn towards God or away. I turned
Mhm.
towards. It was easier for me to lean into that. But also, you really examine your life because now you realize you're on borrowed time. And I had
Yes.
a friend who'd had cancer in freshman year of college, and he said that getting cancer was like getting a front row seat to life. And
Mm.
I don't want to. I feel bad. I lost one of my best friends to cancer at the age of 40. I'm very, very fortunate, and I haven't figured out why some people get cancer and die from it. And we don't have time to explore that one, but I do feel very, very blessed that I did have a very treatable cancer, but also just enough cancer to shake up my life.
Yes. That's so good. I'm
Thank
actually
you.
going to very briefly share my story, and it will
Okay.
definitely weave back into ADHD parenting.
Okay. Okay.
So in 2021, I lost a lifelong friend to the opioid epidemic,
Mm,
and grieving her caused me to have a massive spiritual awakening.
mm,
Divine timing had already led me to trying to become a better parent because what we were doing was not working.
mm-hmm,
And the spiritual path, mindfulness, everything led me to become a better mom. My
mm,
son actually calls me the calm mom. I've asked him
mm.
not to do that in front of the non-calm moms because that can be triggering. But from the time he was 6 and earlier, he knew me as shouty mom, crazy
Mm-hmm,
mom. And now
mm-hmm.
he actually recognized the difference. And I'm so
Wow.
thankful to have had that happen. I mean, losing her was traumatic,
Mm-hmm,
but I'm trying to reframe it as her giving me a spiritual awakening as her final parting gift. But it's literally
mm,
transformed my life and made me a better woman, a better mom. I could talk
mm.
about it for the rest of my life. I'm so thankful to
Mm,
be here.
wow. Well, that if you haven't done an episode on that, I think that would be super helpful because I
Mm.
have definitely, especially when undiagnosed ADHD, I've gone off the rails for sure. And then, two of my three children have it. So you want to talk about a trigger fest.
Yeah.
But I did finally figure out with my youngest. My youngest would have the temper tantrums. My other two did not have those kind of temper tantrums. And now, again, now I realize what was going on. But really what she needed was just to be held. To just hold her tight and just hold her. And that's what she needed versus that I remember locking her out of my room because she was having a temper tantrum and she wanted to follow me in. And I'm like, Calgon, take me away.
Yeah.
And really what she needed was to be held.
Mm. Ah, so a couple
Uh-huh.
of things in there. My
Sure.
son, it needs some space on his own, but he
Mm,
needs to be in the same room. So we do time ins instead of time outs, but it's basically the
okay.
same thing. We just sit
Okay.
together and regulate.
Okay. Nice. Let's just say how lucky is he? I wish I
Mm,
wish I had known when my children were younger. I didn't discover it until my oldest was in middle school.
mm.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm super lucky to be
Mm-hmm.
here. I
Mm-hmm.
wish I had this power in the early, toddler days. It would have been more
Mm-hmm.
helpful for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I'm grateful to be here now.
Right.
My other question is if you're willing to share, how is your middle child handling living in a world of ADHD while not on the spectrum?
That is such a good question. And wait till I give you the answer. My middle child has OCD, which I don't know if you know that, but the two can run together in families. And I would say I
Yes.
probably have a little OCD myself. And she is, and when I went through my divorce, my older two had to share a room. And it was like Felix and Oscar because she needs everything in its place. And then my oldest Will, it was a disaster, and so we ended up having to have my oldest and my youngest share a room so that my middle could have because it is very, very triggering for
Mm.
her. And I ended up actually at one point hiring her to be the cleaning lady of the family because it was like a win-win. I got my house clean, and it's funny because she is in a relationship now with someone who has ADHD, and her best friend has ADHD, so autistic and ADHD. So she's very comfortable in that, and she is medicated for OCD. But it's just funny because even when she was an infant, now this is a crazy story. So my oldest, wherever we would go, at the time, she would fall asleep just wherever we were. And I didn't have to be on a schedule, and we just go. And then she'd sleep in her stroller. She'd sleep in the car. She'd sleep on my friend's floor. My middle had to be in her crib at a certain time. And I remember we were traveling. She was about 5 months old, and we had gone down to visit my mother-in-law, and she had a crib in her room, and we brought the favorite blanket. She is screaming bloody murder. And we have to leave Miami, which is 5 hours from Jacksonville, and drive home at like 2 a.m. because she could not sleep anywhere but her crib. So very regimented. And I didn't make my child that way. And, you know, that's one of the things I think that comes from parenting, is that you realize that your children are made to be exactly who they are. And it doesn't matter how you parent them. I mean, you need to learn to parent the child you have.
Yeah, I love that so much.
Yeah.
That is one of the core themes of my parent coaching. We need to let go and grieve, if needed, the child that we thought we were getting and the life that we thought we would have, and love the child right in front of us. And that's very challenging sometimes. Looking for some new toys and tools that your ADHD kiddos will love? Play Therapy Supply has you covered with a great selection of toys, games, and fidgets that can be used by ADHD children, their parents, caregivers, and professionals alike. From fidget toys that help children calm down, de-stress, and focus, to social emotional learning resources to help kids understand their feelings and emotions, to games and activities designed to improve emotional regulation. Play Therapy Supply has it all. For thousands of items and fast and free shipping, visit playtherapysupply.com today.
So now I just got chills that you said that. So I saw a movie where the guy in the movie says, you know, the day your child is born, you have two children. One is the one you hoped for, and one is the one you got, which is so true. And then the other thing was, I read the book, The Blessing of a Skin Knee. I don't know if you've read that one.
I have not.
It's a great book. So it is told from a Jewish perspective, but it is not, you know, specific to Judaism. And because there are a lot of like Christian schools that read it, but it basically says that having a child is like planting a seed. You know, it's like, you know, when you have your own child that you bore from your body, you know exactly, or you think you know what kind of seed you're going to get. If you adopt a child, you get like wild seed, you know, wildflower seeds. You don't know what you're going to get. And they said, we really need to spend more time in the, I don't really know what I've planted.
Yeah.
You know, so anyway.
So you'll get this as a conscious being. I asked the universe for patience, and I was given a child with ADHD, and it took me many years to realize what was happening there.
That's so funny, because patience is also what I need. I think that runs with the trait. So like, I know, how are you in like waiting in lines or small talk?
Well, I can definitely go off the rails. I am trying my best to not reach for my phone when standing in lines and just be bored.
Oh, I love this.
That's
I
hard.
might take that from you.
Yeah.
That Penn Holderness uses the term borcher. Have you heard boredom and torture?
Yes, but that is a real thing.
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
So one other thing I wanted to elaborate on in there, that is how my dad told me that he had ADHD, was the OCD component. And looking back on it, I definitely think my son had it. He may have grown out of it, but we have several videos of him sorting toys as a toddler, 1-2 years old, by color, shape, size. All superheroes had to be in the same formation, exactly the same, facing the same way. And it was pretty incredible to see. And I'm just now kind of realizing, oh, that was part of it too.
You know what? And I will tell you that OCD for me flares up in times of stress. So it can also be, you know, if he was feeling stressed or, you know, needing to control something. I know when I am stressed, I will clean. That's just something that I do. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I will say this. I love talking to other people with ADHD. And before we got on our call today, I had scheduled this at 7 in the morning, my time, thinking I don't have any other appointments. That's the time I can fit you in, but not thinking about the fact that I normally record my podcast in my daughter's room because she has the best internet signal. And I was not thinking about the fact that it's 7 a.m. She's getting up and getting ready for school, and she's 16, so I don't need to do anything.
Yeah.
But I'm like, oh my gosh. So I'm not going to mask. I'm just going to tell you this is what's going on. And I can either sit in my car and talk quietly, which is where I am, or I can just be where my office and my, is, which is in the middle of the house. I took over the living room. And, but I loved that. I'm like, I can just share that with you. This is what masking looks like.
Yes.
And I didn't even know what masking was until I went to the International ADHD Conference.
Ooh. I have an interesting story on masking. I try to teach parents to help their kids with self-monitoring and self-agency, basically just to become aware of our tics and stems. And I got into an internet debate with a mom who told me that I was teaching our kids to mask. And I was like, I'm really not. I'm just teaching them to become aware of their own self, teaching them self-agency. So I kind of backed away from the masking conversation for a minute.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have no opinion. There's a part of me that, life is hard enough,
Yeah.
right? So sometimes we do need to do things to make ourselves blend in. And I will say that's one thing that I am proud about my child, my non-binary child. I wouldn't be what I would have picked, right? But I'm so proud that they are able to stand in their authentic selves and say, to the world, this is who I am. I'm going and really embracing it. But I know it's difficult. But I'm glad that we're living in a world where people can be who they are, even though a lot of people don't want to accept that. I think, looking back into my own family, there were a lot of people who may have been gay that didn't come out and then didn't live a life that they wanted to live,
Yeah.
because of it. So
I agree.
anyway, that's another tangent.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
You're fine. When I turned this podcast started as I have an ADHD parenting group, and I used to ask guests to come in and speak to us. And someone was like, you should turn this into a podcast. So I knew in creating this podcast, it would hardly ever be linear, and I'm totally okay with that.
Yeah, well, I don't know how it could be with ADHD people.
So I want to ask you a couple of questions, and then I want to give you some time to spotlight your podcast and then your future endeavors.
Okay.
But one quirky one that I love to ask, if you could rename ADHD, what would you rename it, and why, if you care to share?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. Well, I can't think of one off the cuff. Maybe I'll think of one later, but I do like Dr. Ned Hallowell's use of the word VAST, which is variable attention stimulus trait, because it's true. People think that if you have ADHD, you can't focus, and that's absolutely not true. If I am interested in something, all else falls away, and I'm able to absolutely super focus. And I will say that I feel like, so I'm turning 55 this month, and I have more energy than most people, anywhere near my age. My father is turning 80, and as of a couple of years ago, could do 50 push-ups. And I'm actually not speaking to my dad, and that's a whole other conversation. I think there's a lot of rejection sensitive dysphoria going on with him, and I'm open to having a relationship with him, but anyway, that's another conversation for another day. But when the last time I saw him, he could do 50 push-ups in his mid to late 70s.
Wow.
So I love the energy, and I will say, like, probably, and Penn Holderness spoke about it at the International ADHD Conference. He was the keynote speaker, and he said if he could be given an on and off button, or an easy button, and he could have turned off his ADHD, or could have, would he said he definitely would have turned it off in school and in college. He said, but as an adult, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And so it's learning to embrace it.
Absolutely. So one small tidbit before I ask the next question.
Sure.
My son, as most children with ADHD, struggles in school. So I have really, really, really tried to instill it in him that ADHD might be holding us back right now, but one day it is going to serve you so well later in life.
Yep.
So every Sunday
Mm-hmm.
night, I read him a story of someone who is extremely successful with ADHD because I want
I
him to
love
know,
that.
I need you to know, like right now it
Mm-hmm.
may stink, but one day it's going to be amazing for
So
you.
I did a podcast interview yesterday. I and her name was Elle Flaherty, and she teaches executive coaches, and she also has ADHD, and she's was an international litigator. But she told me there's some gene that they've isolated, that they've figured out exists and has existed in like since they can go back, and we need to be here. There's so many talents that we offer the population that we have survived for a reason,
Yeah.
and we're not all meant to be the farmers. Some of us are meant to be the hunters.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I love that. I love that you do that. You seem just wow. I wish I had been raised by you.
I hope he feels that way one day.
He
I
will.
really
He
do.
will. Yes.
So, if
Okay.
you could, do you think being diagnosed as an adult gives you a different perspective on ADHD than, say, our children who have had an early start?
Well, this is something that I'm dealing with in my own podcast, which is what would my life had been like if I had known all along, if I could have put that scaffolding in place, if we could have addressed it. And it's funny, I told my daughter who was just diagnosed, she's a junior in high school. And again, I wasn't aware of ADHD when my oldest child was really dealing with it because I just didn't have the time and the bandwidth to be in that space. And I'm now enrolled in the ADCA coaching program. And I said, take advantage of me. Let me help you and give you the tools while you're still in this house that you're going to need to go out into the world.
Yeah.
And how lucky she is that I am now aware. So I am, with my Grandma Has ADHD podcast, a lot of it is exploring, the what ifs. And and my mom, so I'll say this about my mom, who I call the original grandma of Grandma Has ADHD. My mom's really bright and creative, and there's so many wonderful traits. But my mother didn't finish college and really never finished anything. And it used to drive me crazy because thankfully I am able to finish, I finished college and I'm able to finish things. And I didn't have an understanding of my mom at all. And now, I mean, we're closer than we've ever been. I have an empathy for her that because she had to get through life with undiagnosed ADHD and all the things that she was treated for anxiety and depression. No therapist, no psychiatrist ever saw that she had ADHD. And what would her life have been like if she could have been put on proper medication, or even if you're not on medication, given the skills and know, like for me, for instance, this is a perfect example. I now recognize that I am going to forget. It's not if I'm going to forget. Like I always think, oh, I'm going to remember this idea, or I'm going to remember to turn the eggs off the stove when I'm boiling them. For no, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not going to.
Yeah.
I know I'm going to plan to not, just like you planned your podcast. I hit record because I know, like, so I now wear a smartwatch, which I thought was going to be a distractor for me, but it has been so helpful because I can be like, oh, set the timer for this, and now I can't take it off.
Yeah.
So yeah, did I answer that question?
Yes. That
Okay. Okay.
probably a podcast for another day. I need to get my mother's approval for that, but I would
Uh-huh.
love to talk one day about forgiving your parents for
Oh,
everything that happened before they knew or before you knew. But now our
yes.
relationship is so different and so beautiful.
Yeah. Danielle, I told you I wanted to have you as a guest on my podcast because I've had a lot of people who had fathers with ADHD.
Mm,
Um, but because the guest I had yesterday, when you have a mother with ADHD, because the mother really is the executive functioning of the house,
yeah.
whether she should be in that role or not, right? And so as a child, like I remember missing a parent teacher conference for my kids. Like so you know, we probably, I'm not going to use the word suffered, but suffered,
Mm,
because our mothers maybe couldn't hold it together,
yeah. No, suffer is
you
a
know.
probably pretty perfect word for to describe that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
So I have to ask
Yeah.
Jamie, is Grandma Has ADHD because of your mom, or were you thinking about later in your own life?
Oh, that's a good question. So, when you have ADHD, you have the two times, the now and not now.
Mm-hmm.
And so initially when I started it, it was really because I've been working with seniors for more than 10 years, and I'm seeing it in all of these people that don't even know they have it. And in some cases, I'm addressing it with them. And in some cases, I'm, just letting it go. I'm kind of, testing the waters. I actually, one of my first interviews, even before the podcast aired, was with Dr. Kathleen Nadeau, who has written the only book that exists on seniors with
Oh,
ADHD.
wow.
And I asked her, is it something I should bring up? And she, was like, you've really got to determine your audience. So initially I started it, really to help seniors and their families. And then when I went to the International ADHD Conference, they had about 2 sessions of probably more than 100 on aging and ADHD. And then, another light bulb was like, wait a minute, all of these people who are living in the now are not preparing for what's next. And that's not going to be good for a senior, because when we retire and we're on, if we can afford to retire, we are on fixed incomes. We aren't bringing in the same money. We need to address the challenges. And also, you may not be able to, a lot of people medicate for ADHD. You may not be able to do that. And so we really need to learn those skills, and then throw in a little cognitive impairment that comes from natural aging,
Mm.
and then spice it up with a little ADHD. And then let me give you another one. Even memory care clinics of 1 in 5 are even touching on the idea of ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
So so it has evolved, and now I'm really, it's all of it. You're either a senior that has it, or you're a senior that will have it, or you were raised by a senior in the ADHD space. Obviously we have those neurotypicals out there, but they're not listening to this podcast.
Do you have a process for how you come up with episodes, or does it, like we've talked just now and many ideas have come up for both of us, is it just a random list where you jot things down, or do you have a more linear process?
That's a great question too. I have to tell you, side note, you are really, really a great interviewer. I've been on
Thank
many.
you.
It's so easy to have conversation.
Thank you.
So I've met a lot of people at the International ADHD Conference who have been guests on the show, and I've been bringing them in. And then sometimes the thought will come to me. I've only recorded one episode on my own. It was New Year's resolutions. And it's funny, when I listen back to that podcast, I'm like, that sounds like an ADHD podcast. I have a lot of things I want to cover. And I'm probably a month. I have a month out of recorded episodes, but as I bring in guests, and I'm getting people to say yes, because I will say that one thing that happened, it was funny. I was at the conference, and I was sharing my podcast. I brought little stress squeezy balls with my ADHD podcast card to give to people. And somebody says, oh, you mean we're not going to outgrow it like they say we will? And, it was like, laugh, no, we're not going to outgrow it. And I think because I am the only person right now in this space of talking about it, I'm getting a lot of yeses from thought leaders in the ADHD space. So, I have some ideas for how it's going to evolve, but again, I don't know, I'm sure you are aware of this, but like if you go to a newsstand now, you'll see ADHD magazine, or you pick up any ADHD book other than Kathleen Nadeau's, nobody is addressing the ADHD and seniors in that intersection.
And that's where you come in.
That's exactly where I'm coming in.
I love that.
Thank you.
So you're in a unique situation where you have children with ADHD, you're living with ADHD, and now you recognize that your mom, has ADHD.
And father, and my father has it as well.
So
yeah.
What can you tell, I am 40, I'm in that space, but probably not ready, to acknowledge or definitely deal with being in that space. What advice would you have for those of us in living in that space?
So, what I tell people is like, this is who you were born to be, right? You did not make yourself have ADHD. I know some people, I think they believe trauma response might echo ADHD. I think that there's probably a lot of family trauma And I don't think that the trauma is causing the ADHD. I think that it existed, like we had emotionally dysregulated parents and so that's a whole other conversation. But I say, pat yourself on the back because you have had to overcome obstacles that other people hadn't had to overcome. And what I tell my kids and everybody all the time is what you resist persists. So you can, deny it, but when you lean into it and figure out, how to work with it, your life is going to be better because you're not really going to change it. And I also, back to my spirituality, and this may be a little woo-woo for your conversation, but I'm just going to go there with you.
Please.
I don't believe that we only live one life. Like, I really, truly believe that our souls are on a journey, and we have lessons that we're meant to learn in this lifetime. And then so I sound all like Shirley MacLaine, but it's a little more acceptable now. And just like you said, you felt like patience was the lesson that you needed to learn. I try to view hard obstacles as, what is this here to teach me? And then grow from it. And, there's a lot that ADHD has to teach us. But I also love that it makes us resilient and, optimistic. And, I love that we can solve like really, when we're in a high stress situation, we can go in and take charge and solve the problem and think clearly. And, there are other things that kind of stink, but you've got to look at the blessings.
Yeah. Girl, you are preaching to the woo-woo choir. I am
Oh, I love it.
I am a practicing Buddhist, and sometimes I wonder if my woo-woo-ness is helping or hurting my child.
Oh, I love it. No, my kids, I remember my little one, when she did something wrong and I asked her to write a letter about why it was wrong, and she wrote something about her karma. And I will call myself a Jew-boo. So I am Jewish, and it's interesting because I sort of went away from Judaism, then I had a spiritual awakening, and then I ended up interweaving my spirituality with Judaism, but also the non-attachment of Buddhism. So I love that you're Buddhist. I hear that Southern accent and I immediately think, Southern Baptist. So
Yeah.
that is not Buddhist.
You are one of many. I am a very rare individual here in the foothills of North Carolina. So, so it's
Wow.
lovely to have conversations like this.
You need to come to San Diego where you'll fit right in.
Yes, yes. I actually do have a wonderful Dharma group, but I have to travel to them about 40 minutes, but it's totally worth it.
Oh, good for you. I love it.
Jamie, I could honestly sit and do this all day, but I
Me
want to be
too.
respectful of your parenting time. I want you to tell people where they can find you and all of your upcoming endeavors. I know you went a little bit off video, but I want them to know because
I
they need to know.
I appreciate that. So I have a website and a podcast called Grandma Has ADHD. And you don't have to be a grandparent and you don't have to be a woman, but it really is a very catchy name, as is your name. And it is meant to really encapsulate, seniors and ADHD. I have created a Facebook group. We are new, we are fledgling, but as I said, I am an emerging space. So find me on the Grandma Has ADHD Facebook page. Find my podcast. Listen to my podcast because more people need to hear it, and I can't get the word out until I get my listenership up. So listen and subscribe. And then of course I have a website, and I have, a lot in the works because I do work in the senior space. I am really educating people. I'm starting in San Diego, but I'm starting to speak outside of San Diego about what ADHD looks like in seniors and how we can support them. So I am available for speaking. I'm available for trainings, and you're going to know me as a thought leader in a couple of years.
I love that so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jamie, it has been an absolute joy. Thank you for reminding us that ADHD does not have an expiration date.
I love that. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to have you on my podcast, and thank you for what you're doing.
Wow, and there you have it, Jami Goldfarb Shapiro. Check her out on all platforms, but in particular, let's support Grandma Has ADHD. This is a message that we need to spread far and wide, and for the love of everything chaotic, go hug your grandparents today. I'll see you guys back here next week for Chaos and Caffeine. Love you guys.